Good afternoon. I
record,
would
and
like to
it's
remind you
also
that all
in
of the
the
sessions will
Rebrats
be
media. We
recorded. You
have
will have
three
simultaneous
simultaneous
interpretation,
interpretation
English,
channels,
Spanish,
English,
and
Portuguese,
Portuguese.
and Spanish, and you
You will
can
also
hear
be able
the
to listen.
webinar in the original language. You choose a language in which you want to hear with a globe that's on your bottom right of the screen. Choose interpretation, select the language. You have to click on mute original audio to choose your audio. I'm Barbara. I work at the Executive Secretary of the Brazilian Network for Technologies, Rebrats, in the management and incorporation of health technologies of the Ministry of Health. Again, when we're talking today results of Rebrats and the assessment of RedETSA. The issue is the estimation of cost effectiveness in countries Latin American experience. We will discuss the calculation processes and definition of a thresholds for Brazil and Colombia. Representing RedETSA, we will have the advisor, regional advisor of the Pan American Organization of Health, Mr. Alexander Lengruber Pajo. He will offer the welcome words, and then Luciane Benan, who is the strategic management in health technologies. Alexander Lengruber has the floor.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much, Barbara.
Me gostaria saludar a todos e a todas para mais esta edição de
I would
webinar.
like to greet all of you and welcome you to this session for the second time. This is a series of seminars of Rebrats, and today we have the pleasure of having number.
Estamos muito contentos já de delegar a este segundo webinário realizado em colaboração com Rebrats.
This is a seminar that is held together with the collaboration of Rebrats. Our first joint webinar was very successful. We had over 200 participants from the region of the Americas on the topic of artificial intelligence and evaluation of health technologies. Also, I would like to remind you that all the webinars from RedETSA, we have already celebrated 33, this is 34th. They are all available in our RedETSA website. You already know this, redetsa.org. And if you need, our team will be able to direct you there. Also, we will be broadcasting this through the Pajo channels. This has been a very special year for RedETSA and for Pajo, and for all the member states here in the region in matters of health technology evaluation, because it's been 10 years since we launched a very important framework, which is the resolution and of evaluation of health technologies. And that was the first document agreed to by the member states. And this shows that the countries are spearheading these efforts, and they have agreed the inclusion of health technologies in the priority agenda when they adopted the pertinent resolution in 2012. 2 years later, in the World Health Assembly, a document on this topic was approved, and we already had a similar document 2 years before that. So this is a very important topic in the process of consolidation and evaluation of health technologies for decision-making in the region of the Americas. And this 10-year frame allowed us to present a report to the health ministries and to all the member states of PAHO. And then next week, during the Pan American Sanitary Conference, we will be presenting this document. We will be sending you this topic. You will be receiving a link to the PAHO website so that you can accompany the presentation of this document. This is or will be already available next week. And we hope that is going to be approved by the member states because this is a very important balance of all the advances in the region. We have to remember also that we will be having a very special time this year. We will go back to in-person meetings of the network after so many years of having virtual meetings. Finally, we will be able to have an in-person meetings, and this used to be a yearly event up until the beginning of the pandemic. And so this year again, we will be together in our RedETSA meeting together with Rebrats. And so this is very important. This will be from November 7 to 9 in Brasilia. And we would like to invite all of you who are able to go. We will have 1.5 days of meeting, and then after that, we will be dedicating our agenda to the members of the network. I wanted to greet all of you once more and to thank all of you who have participated. I will not name any names because I always forget things and names, but I would like to help my colleagues in Rome and other colleagues who have worked very hard in the organization of this, but also to all our members of the ministries of health. I don't want to name anybody because then I don't want to be unfair by forgetting other people who have worked so hard in this effort. So I thank all of you and all of the participants and all of those of you who are here today. We have almost 170 participants already connected. Also, I would like to thank the presenters today. I would like to thank Verónica from CENETEC. She's a collaborator from the beginning of RedETSA. She'll be the moderator of our session today. So Verónica, thank you so much for having accepted our invitation. And our presenters, Adriana Robayo from IETS from Colombia. She's here with us today. And Ricardo Fernandez from Brazil, who is working with many of the technology evaluation groups. As you know, we will be talking about the experiences of cost effectiveness in Colombia and Brazil. This is a topic for discussion at the present time, so that we know what's going on in those countries. And then the presenters will explain this. So I will stop here, and I wish you a very successful webinar. I do hope that we will be together in Brasilia in November, and I'd like to greet Vania Canuto Santos. She's the coordinator and department director. And the project that allows this program to go ahead in Brazil is owes Vania a lot. So I'd like to really thank her because we have funds now to conduct activities from the network, especially the in-person meeting that we will have in November. So I would like to express Bajo's thanks to Brazil and to Vania, uh, specifically because we have worked on the consolidation of all of these efforts as the regional network, which has been recognized by all the member states working on technologies on the Americas. Once more, thank you very much, and I wish you a very successful week.
Good afternoon. I have a little problem with the camera, but let me thank you all for being here. This issue of the threshold, cost effectiveness threshold, is very relevant, especially with everything that's been happening in Brazil in the Ministry of Health. It's been more than 10 years since we've been discussing thresholds in Brazil, but now, through Ricardo, we have a new gaze on how this was built in practice, the issue of cost effectiveness thresholds, and in the next few years, how can we share the experience of our thresholds, helping our decision making in Brazil? So this is an important and historical moment for us, and we would like to thank you all for being here, and I hope you can contribute, can ask questions, make comments, and we are very thankful to the presenters, Adriana Robayo and Ricardo Fernandez, for their presentations, and as well as Verónica. Thank you very much. Let me give the floor now to Barbara. Thank you, Alexandra. Thank you, Luciane. Before I give the floor to the presenters, some instructions on how we're going to work today. We will have a presentation by Verónica, which will be about 10 minutes, and she will be talking about the relevance of the issue, an introduction about cost effectiveness threshold, and then uh, after Adriana, each of the presenters will have 30 minutes. After that, we'll have a period of question and answers. And during the webinar, you can write observations, comments, questions in the chat, and we will be reading them at the end and will be answered by the presenters. Verónica Gallegos is our moderator today. She's a biomedical engineer from the Polytechnical Institute in Mexico with a postgraduate and PhD in public health from the University of Mexico. She works in the Center of Technological Excellence in the Ministry of Health, and since 2010, she is the Assistant Director for the Assessment of Technologies in Health of the National Center of Technology Excellence in Health, CENETEC. She has published several articles, and she's been participating with RedETSA since it was created, and she's part of the working group of medical devices. Verónica, you have the floor.
Gracias, Alexandre.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Alexandre. Thank you, Lucien, for this invitation to moderate this table and this webinar. Thank you, Francisco and Marlene and Stephanie, for your support and for your invitation. Without further ado, I would like to begin the second webinar. It's a joint webinar of Rebrats and RedETSA. The webinar is called Estimation of the Cost Effectiveness Thresholds and Experiences in Latin America. And we will be analyzing two experiences in the region And then this will help us to learn what is the true value and the importance of determining a cost-effectiveness threshold in health systems. So just to put this in context, we will begin by saying that health systems have different challenges, and then one of them is to increase the coverage to the population in an environment of epidemiological changes, especially with limited resources in the countries of the region. In many countries of the region, we do not have too many resources.
Basically, in European countries, this happened. However, we have had much work, collaboration work here in Latin America for the development and analysis of this type of threshold. The evaluation of health technology is indeed a systematized process which goes through various tools. In the various center of them, we have economic assessment studies, which have become necessary in order to have information regarding decision making, how to have work systematized and analytical to improve our work. The economic evaluations indeed are a comparative analysis between two alternatives and two interventions in terms of costs and repercussions. But in this case, we're going to be centering on the economic evaluation and the cost effectiveness analysis in order to thus give way to the discussion. I'm having problems making my presentation go forward, but in general terms, and this will be, of course, discussed by our panelists, the cost effectiveness studies are studies which are expressed in monetary terms and benefit to health. As a result of all this analysis, we have the cost of incremental cost effectiveness, and this value, as far as health is concerned, is the actual ratio between the costs and the alternatives in relation to the benefits given by both alternatives. We have determined the specific values known as thresholds. This is the cost effectiveness threshold, which is represented as lambda on the graph. And this threshold has different ways to be calculated, be it determining the cost per unit, or else by adopting the amounts to be contributed by each country. Each country and every system will decide what will be the way in which this threshold is to be defined. Cost of the effectiveness threshold is indeed a representation of the opportunity costs in terms of health, which helps us prioritize those technologies and interventions as part of a healthcare system based upon those technologies which are cost effective, those which do not go through this well-defined threshold. The cost effectiveness threshold determine the actual expenditure in health, because with higher thresholds, the higher health expenditures generated, and lower thresholds, these limit the actual expenditures for health. They also modify the expectations as regards the results. This also contributes to direct the resources and cost-effective interventions by way of a more rigorous and scientific procedure, and it is a decision-making tool for the negotiation frameworks for those technologies and those technologies which are not cost-effective. There have been some discussions regarding how to determine the thresholds. And although these are not unique tools for decision making, you must realize that these are not elements in isolation, but rather we have to consider other elements as well for the decision making. The thresholds of cost effectiveness, when these are based on opportunity costs, they leave aside several other contextual elements in the healthcare system, and the recommendations which are made in determining a cost effectiveness threshold makes it advisable to review it with the passing of time. And for this, we can derive new evidence, or or else there might be changes within the general context of the decision making. The cost effectiveness thresholds are specific to each and every country. Every country will determine, based upon the actual value a certain society gives it, what are the technologies and the context within which they have been developed. Without further ado, I will now be presenting our two presenters this afternoon. We have, first of all, Dr. Adriana Robayo Garcia. She's a surgeon in the National University of Colombia, specializing in internal medicine. And she is a teacher in the area of health in the University of Buenos Aires. She's got knowledge regarding social economic, management of public health, occupational health, and epidemiology. With over 20 years experience in health, from academics to management, she's a member of the LATAM Forum on International Policies for the Evaluation of Health Technologies of the HTIE. She's a member of the network of policies informed by evidence called ITNET, the INETA, and of course, RedETSA. She's a member of the Economics Committee for Health and Renal Health of the Latin American Association for Nephrology and Hypertension, for the Agenda of Health in the Americas. Later on, we will be listening to Ricardo Fernandez. Ricardo Fernandez is a pharmacist from the General University of Rio de Janeiro, postgraduate pharmacoeconomics from the Coimbra University of Barcelona, doctorate in public health from the EMS from the University of Rio de Janeiro. He has 11 years experience working in the evaluation of health technologies. He worked in the Department of Management and Incorporation of Health Technologies at the HID, in the Ministry of Health, and particularly in the Executive Secretary of the National Committee for the Incorporation of Technologies in the Single Health Care System of CONITEC, covers with 6 centers specializing. Again, NATS, according to the acronym in Brazil. Without further ado, I call on Dr. Ana Robayo to please tell us about the experience they had in the Technological Evaluation Institute in Colombia. Go ahead, Doctor. Thank you very much. Please allow me to share my screen. Can you tell me if you can hear and watch the screen? Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead. Thank you so very much for this invitation. And I hope to very briefly be able to tell you about what this experience in Colombia has been. We were able to devise this threshold about 2 years ago. A joint effort, particularly as far as thanks to the funding by our institute, which is the official agency in Colombia, and the Ministry of Finance and Public Credit. This originally stemmed from initial approximation of a doctoral thesis by one of the candidates in our institute, and later on this led for the steps. The Ministry of Health had no resources for this purpose, so after many efforts, we were able to convince the Ministry of Finance about the goodness and the importance of developing this idea. For this, we followed several stages that I will be discussing, but it's a process that took about 6 to 7 months with more than 10 people involved. The total cost in dollars is about $200,000. Indexed and under this evaluation, it might be a little less at present, but anyway, this will give you an idea of the amount. With regard to the Institute, we work together with SLANH, the Colombian Association pro-family, which takes care of productivity aspects in Colombia. This is somewhat the situation prevailing regarding the threshold. What is the threshold? And you will see how we find the information. An estimation was made for Colombia, with estimation for Colombia and the costs involved. It is clear what the threshold is, a new tool to prioritize sanitary economics, the management of public funds. And of course, the result may be summarized with this information and the so-called ICER. Sometimes these are not comparable. You have to decide how are you going to compare to order to establish priorities. In the long term, this measure that allows for comparisons is an element of cost effectiveness, depends the opportunity cost in health, one and the marginal elements that also exist. Therefore, our objective was to determine this cost effectiveness threshold. Colombia, country has a medium income, a middle income country. We have three regimes, contribution for the population that has payment capacity, a special regime also for those that have no resources, and which have to do also with the petroleum company. And most of the expenditures are covered by way of public expenses. And it is about the 15% pocket expenditures for all Colombians. Some people have problems of access. Therefore, this threshold in Colombia has to be prepared with microdata for more than 13 series of data per annum, more than 100 million pieces of data that are incorporated for this classification. I would say this is a publication that came up, and it is by the group, the core group, our technicians. Some of them are university professionals, graduating from the National University or the University of Antioquia and others. So it is an intensive piece of work for some 8 months. This technical group with epidemiologists, statisticians, actuaries, doctors, and others, which gives support to the basic group. In this group worked 8 months full time, and there were computational teams where more than 10 people having high-level technological structure to process that huge set of information. We had, of course, to deal with a very large number of documents, using them as a basis for this purpose. It was a very many months of screening and reviewing such documents, that which had been published, especially by the Brits. The calculation was done by using this program. We used the mortality data, the information from York University data going from 2013 to 2017, was the contributive regime, where there was much consistency in such information, and the information regarding expenditures in health. Also, we bore in mind the regulation of prices to see what variations there were between the years, and finally to thus be able to have the necessary information for this purpose. This is the curve distribution of a logarithm of expenditures in health. This is distribution where you see the consistency of the information in a temporary manner from 2013 to 2017, which is quite homogeneous. These are the econometric results obtained during those years. According to quality, several tests were conducted, elasticity, averages, and so on. What we found eventually was that the study is congruent and consistent with previous data. It's about 86% per capita for this population regarding mortality. Here you have the information. Where you see previous information according to statistic evaluations, you see that an average can be obtained in Chanecos and Richon, and from there you obtain an average, which is adjusted to this 86%, which is the final result. This 86% of GDP for 2019 is about $5,180. At a given point in time, they asked us, how did you take care of these estimations? What were the values based on? What was the variation year after year? It is also considered that any short-term adjustment necessary is sometimes necessary, but we have to make calculations for subsequent years, something which has been considered important. And as University of York says, this has to be adjusted according to inflation. As far as the public policies, we're starting these courses now, and we are conducting economic evaluations for several years now. As of now, we have 2 full economic evaluations, but obviously, in order to establish this threshold and this evaluation, in order to compare with the previous year, we continue to use this per capita values as recommended in order for us to be able to look at the variations according to sensitivity and conduct economic evaluations. We also use therapeutical positioning data based on effectiveness and security. Then we do the cost effectiveness procedure. And once we have obtained the results, we come before a medical panel, which in keeping to this with these concepts explained broadly, they make a position of the various molecules and technologies to be applied to patients. We did this the last year. We had several ones, but especially let me say that these are thresholds not just for a molecule, but many other calculations and models, because there's much information that we are comparing here in under. Therefore, in one way or the other, we believe that the data is not the only criterion in order to have this public policy, but at least it is something that allows us to conduct comparisons and technologies and different types of technology. It is important to give a specific weight to this information for the sake of comparison. And this year we will continue to work and broaden this information by including sanitation technology with other benefits charged to public financing. In other words, the UCE in Colombia for the funding of these technologies. We're about to begin the establishment of prices, the point of entry, therapeutical value criteria, which have been discussed also very broadly by the ministries. We're also here considering the pricing of medications as part of the National Pharmaceutical Policies document, which has to do with economic and social factors, which is adjusted every 10 years. We're coming to that date now. Also, technological evaluations with adjustments. What are the limitations now? There's much interest in the regard limitations and many doubts by the pharmaceutical industry as to how much they're going to pay, what is going to be done, what is going to happen. So this has given way to much speculation, but now we're reaching some solution. The Ministry of Finance clearly wants to establish this. We're convinced that this is what we have to examine, but the Ministry of Health is also conducting assessments in order to determine this point of entry. With the limitations, we have detected the use of the UCE in catastrophic and orphan diseases, rather than just defining a deliberation framework. How many months or how many times could the country do this, and whether society is ready to pay for this? How much should we pay for this? It is clear that the cost effectiveness has to be considered, and also whether we're going to make an estimate as to the experience in other countries, specific threshold for this catastrophic diseases. In one way or the other, as cross-reference, we have the evaluation continuous assessment within the times which are being considered. Also, we insist that this calls for a broad effort, and with this in one way or the other, we can deal, if we're dealing with a fixed budget, that's a problem. We have a flexible budget, there are alternatives as it is being done, especially for people to then become cured or not. We cannot boil down to the well-trained technicians who have to do and deal with these issues in the same industry. Sometimes we think that this is not possible to be done.
Excuse me, this was very short, but that is what I wanted to comment. And this is all on our part. And then I hope that I have contributed to the discussion. Thank you. Thank you so much, Adriana. Thank you so much for your presentation. This is an excellent example of the application of the thresholds and the estimation of the cost effectiveness threshold. Please do not forget to go ahead and put your questions in the questions and answer, also on the chat. And at the end, when we open the discussion, and when we see electronic hands raised, we will open the floor for discussion. Without further ado, I will give the floor to Ricardo now. Thank you in advance for your presentation.
Thank you, Veronica. I will share my presentation. First of all, I would like to thank Parro and WHO for the invitation so I can present the Brazil, the use of thresholds in Brazil. I also would like to thank the speakers, in particular Veronica and Adriana, that they summarize the concept and what is the need, the use of thresholds in healthcare. I will try to summarize because I believe my colleagues have already summarized exactly what it is. In Brazil, this process has been debated within the Ministry of Health since 2015. That was my first year working in the Ministry of Health, and we used to talk a lot about it. We received an initial publication. There was a study from Argentina guided by Dr. Pichon. And since then, we've been talking about this process. And in 2019, it was coordinated by Professor Ivan Zimmerman from University of Brasilia. When we got together and started to work an initial report with recommendations, we worked together with the technological commission called CENETEC, is a national commission in Brazil. They actually recommend implementation of technology in healthcare. And it's different than in Colombia. In Colombia, they had a technological body. They gave it the threshold in terms of cost effectiveness. But in Brazil, we actually gathered studies that have been done and implemented Brazilian data to it. And so we could figure out how we could do it in Brazil. And we had discussions with Polytech. We discussed with the values, amounts, how much we would spend in technology, and what should be the threshold. So we could build a report that later will be used and we were very transparent. It was a process that started with Polytech, and later on for about 20 days in public consultation, we received about 250 contributions from from civil society. Later, we have a hearing with a lot of stakeholders participating. We had patients, we had representatives from associations. We also had healthcare professionals. We also had a representative from pharmaceutical industry. And later we could add all the contribution from civil society. And we were about to release a final report with all the contribution. So we could attribute the threshold and for effectiveness in healthcare in Brazil. So I will talk a little bit about this report. Well, first of all, between 2012 and 2016, we gathered about 46 reports from different organizations, including healthcare technology. And we use that to observe what should be the threshold. Where was Brazil? What Brazil was adopting in the previous decisions? And what did we notice? We realized that according to economic aspect, about 86% from this 46 report had corporations incentive in regards to economics issues. So 86% of those decisions showed us how the incorporation was done. So part of those reports, we're talking about the economic aspects, about cost effectiveness, and it was about over 100,000 reals. So from there on, we could start creating a previous threshold. So we could think that 100,000 reals for quality, which was a high limit, even if it had some negative, where the RCEI was not that high. So how could we implement that differently? We could observe that the maximum amount was about 61,000 reals in quality and 39,000 in the quality. As per the rejected technologies, we had some that was because the cost effectiveness, the cost was way too high, like close to 1 million reais. But we also had technology that were dominating. They were cheaper and more effective, and they were already being used, but we rejected. And Adriana mentioned something similar, that the economic evaluation, or meaning the threshold for cost effective, is not a single criteria to recommend technology for healthcare. So in summary, analyzing previous decisions insinuated there was a threshold that had a maximum amount between 61,000 reals in quality. We evaluated a few technologies according to quality, and 39,000 for the quality within the technology that was evaluated.
Só para ressublinhar essa questão,
and I would like to emphasize that about 19 of the demands were mentioned throughout the report. And we was taking consideration cost effectiveness. So this was the second most frequently reason, cost effectiveness, throughout the final considerations. And they were explained in the final report. So more above the economic decision, the technology that were already developed, it was part of the reason why it was rejected, even more than the cost effectiveness reasons. So we read so many writers, including Ivan, Dr. Ivan, they found similar values. And then we based in studies that were being developed throughout the world. And it had Brazilian data. And I believe the Argentina one was very interesting because it developed a unique model where they could associate the unit in life expectancy. So how much Brazil spent over the last few years. So we could be possible to add 1 year on the average lifespan, life expectation of population. So we kept changing it into US dollars. And when we came out with about between 14,000 and 17,000 US dollars. We also study based on the English healthcare system. And the value was between 3,000 to 9,000 US dollars. So once we change that by per capita GDP, so that brought us a sense on what would be the threshold in Brazil. The studies from 2015. In 2015, the GDP in Brazil was different. Also, the US dollar was also different. So that's what we were talking in the Polytech. Another method we used was the efficiency frontier. That's a method that evaluates the cost benefit with technology in a specific point. So if there is already a group of technology that has been incorporated, it could be ABC or whatever used. So the next technology that should be incorporated, it should put it in a threshold that was developed by the technology people that represent the better cost effectiveness. In this case, technology was dominated. So it would be more expensive, more effective. So the technology D, which is more expensive and more effective, it should work in linear. So in this case, technology D should be in this black dot lines. So the cost would reduce and it could be added to the effectiveness frontier. And it should be part of this group of technology. But the problem with this methodology is that once you have a group of technology, you lose effectiveness and profit because you're not taking consideration cost effectiveness, because you can't compare how much you spend to incorporate technology D to the system. So you can compare in a different way, in an exclusive way. This is a problem. And why is that? Because you can compare and you reduce the effectiveness because you're not working with cost opportunity in this case. However, this methodology could be used as an alternative, in particular in cases where the final result is different. For example, it's complicated to calculate a child's life expectancy. And also cases of ultra rare diseases in Brazil. So we couldn't have a threshold in this. So the workshop we did, we had a workshop that created some recommendations. We had work groups that gave suggestions that I summarized and put in this slide. Among those, it shows the importance that use a threshold in the decision-making process in healthcare. It's very important to take consideration the qualia and also use others. And we said that the discussion should be not limited to this framework. Another, define what is the reference value and to take in consideration the effectiveness of the system and the cost of opportunity. This one it could be applicable. We use 4 specific case studies where we could use a higher threshold to spend more in the life expectancy and quality of life. And the 4 cases that we chose was rare disease, serious disease in children, and endemic disease, specifically with low-income population in Brazil. This value was stipulated and it was expected. It was agreed by the group 3 times the reference value. This was more or less 1 GDP. That was also very similar to the study done in Argentina. And the discussions related to advanced disease, such as genetic therapies, these have a very high cost, and it was outside the threshold of cost effectiveness. So, theme by theme, the use of threshold of cost effectiveness is not a single criteria. We also use different criteria in the decision-making process, such as clinical, as effectiveness, safety, and also benefits and impact of technology and the budget. We also talk about the patient, such as ethics, if the patient would accept technology, and also organization criteria, such as logistic in the healthcare, and impact of sustainability in the healthcare. So the threshold has an exclusive analysis of cost effectiveness within the 4 dimensions in the decision-making process. This was reflected in the previous studies when we showed the 6 out of the 46 reports that we took in consideration, took the implementation technology into consideration. Another important point to discuss is equality. About 30% did not agree, neither disagree with this, and about 30% strongly agree with this consideration. And that's why we realize that equality should be considered the main point, is particularly when we talk about comparison. So the main goal in the healthcare system was like a quality of life for the population. And would have this goal, and that should be considered, that would compare among themselves, and then from that one, taking into consideration cost and opportunity and the effectiveness of the recommendation. Another important point was the use 4 alternative thresholds. So we asked the plenary if they agree or not in taking consideration rare disease, neglected disease, childhood diseases, also terminal patients. So we excluded terminal patients, and all the 4 were taken into consideration, so they could receive a higher threshold. We did have some guidelines since 2022 that we also eliminated patients in terminal patients. So rare disease, 1.3 people per 2,000 individuals. We have a law in Brazil that stipulates, and ultra rare disease, they had 1 per 50,000 reals. That we also emphasize that we will discuss it at a later point. So the amount had about 50% of votes. The other values that had more votes was a reference point. So we did not propose alternative threshold. And we have 3 times the reference value. And in the second round of questions, 62.5 voted in the plenary. And to finalize, I would like to show that the technology, the organization technology to build threshold for cost effectiveness and the decision-making process in healthcare is extremely important in particular countries that are proposing to be part of the challenge for universal healthcare that seeks to attend the greater number of people, particularly the single use, such as England.
Com pagador único, enfim, que é financiado via
The
impostos.
healthcare system in England is sponsored by taxes. Is also universal healthcare. Another example, we have Australia and Canada. All the systems have been adopted thresholds, and this technological aspect is very important. In particular, when we designing healthcare system with sustainability that propose also effectiveness in the corporations. And once the people paying taxes, and that's how it finances this type of healthcare system. So the healthcare system shows how important it is to structure the threshold. In UK, for example, it goes from 20,000 to 30,000 per quarter. In Australia, it's about 50,000 Australian dollars. And in Canada, about 50,000 to 100,000 Canadian dollars per quarter. And Brazil, it's about 40,000 reals for quality. And in the case of alternative thresholds, we had 100,000 Brazilian reais for the forecast. Rare disease, a neglected disease for people in low income, serious disease, and diseases in children. So we had a public health care threshold. This was also calculated with IETS. That was a little lower, like 0.9 with the GDP per capita, about 35 reals in the South. And the economic evaluations that I could bring quality as the main one.
R$35.000 por ano de vida salvo. Então é isso que eu tinha para falar. Queria agradecer mais uma vez o convite. Qualquer dúvida, me coloco à disposição para responder. Ok? Muito obrigado.
Muchas gracias, Ricardo. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. Please do not forget to write down your questions in the chat. And we already have several questions here that have to do with this subject matter. Both presentations have been extremely interesting. Let me begin in the case of both panelists asking, how do we build an economic valuation culture for health in the region? That is the first question that has been posed. Dr. Adriana, you want to respond? Thank you, Verónica. Yes, indeed, it's a difficult situation. We have to insist once and again. Let me tell you that there's a group of doctors now in the ministry and engineers, economists, and other areas, and people who have had postgraduate education, many people who have been trained by the industry or other universities as well. In the ministry, we have other people who are becoming trained, and we have to insist repeatedly, once and again. We're giving information for doctors, for we want to have a therapeutic value, and we're starting to do this in the case of education with patients. which is basically influenced by the industry, but now we're bringing this to other fields. I wanted to show you this, and also the Congress, to the patients, to the doctors, so that even though there are indeed many possibilities to pay, but not everything can be covered. Not everything can be paid for. You have to decide with the technical foundation, and you know that these are very high costs, and you have to insist all the time on this topic.
Bom, no Brasil, esse processo...
In Brazil, the process happened. There are many people thinking about public health, many study programs on public health that led to the creation of the universal health system. So all thinkers got together and contributed with the Constitution of 1988 for the construction of this system. So many of these universities that graduate in public health started educating thinkers that thought of medicine based on evidence, and a movement emerged for the construction of a national policy for the incorporation of health technologies, and also a policy that was incorporated in the Ministry of Health. They created a task force that consolidated the policies, and with this task force, as Adriana said, we could go into Congress and key people participated in the debate. Key actors in the Ministry of Health contributed, and in 2012, a law was enacted that created a commission for the incorporation of technologies that gave legitimacy of use of economic assessments to incorporate these technologies in the system of the health system. So the seed were the universities. Then this went to the political agenda of the administration and then of the Congress. That's the way it happened in Brazil.
Thank you, Ricardo. Along the same lines, another question which is similar. In countries where there is no cost effectiveness threshold, what is the recommendation made in order to use such a cost effectiveness threshold?
Brazil,
Brazil, until a short while ago, did not have a cost effectiveness threshold. This was discussed in the Polytechnic, a very plural debate, and economic assessment is not a single criteria, but we've been receiving questions, and the studies developed by researchers in Brazil had subjective comparisons based on published studies. The X study assessed more than 200 countries in the world based on a regression with per capita expenditures in health and the expenditures in health. This was the base for cost effectiveness studies of technologies. This was how it was built, and that's how we got to the 40,000 reais linked to a per capita GDP in the per capita expenditures in health in the past. So studies were conducted in the different countries to have a basis in terms of what would be the value that the country would pay. The X study was recently published, and it's an important example.
Puedo decir que se siguen considerando que usual es el
I think we have to continue to consider what is the value of the GDP per capita in this case, but maybe each and every country should estimate its information as soon as possible, because this is something that cannot be avoided. You have to have the concrete information for each and every country and not just a mere approximation. You really have to know what is behind all of this. This is something which is indeed necessary. Thank you. And with regard to this same comment and this same question, Karina is asking whether there is a repository where we can take care of these economic evaluations. In the case of Colombia, yes and no at the same time. Health is a repository, and there are many other uses at the level of the ministry and also at the level of obtaining documents. This has its consequences in legal terms in order to seek out approval. Sometimes the studies which are made should be available to all audiences, but you know that the ministries are more delicate and more particular than I would have wished. So we have a repository where there are over 900 products listed, some of them with several subdivisions, and their economic evaluations, plus others which are going to reach us soon of impact analysis evaluations. So we're doing a lot of work and we hope to bring all of this together. Yes, indeed. We know we're already in October and we're going to have all of this information so that you may see it, and then we could send you some of the additional information obtained. Thank you. Thank you very much. Marcelo, there are several questions. Some of them are very similar. Some for you and some for Ricardo. Marcelo Lencina has told us, has asked, how do you determine prices for new technologies that arrive in the country by way of decrees or legislation, or how would this be worked out? In the case of Colombia, this is done by a committee called the National Committee for Medications. Once there is a sanitation certificate, the pharmaceutical companies start making pressure in the market. And if there's any sort of bias or distortion or something else might be going on, this is then taken up by the National Committee of Medications. Regarding to new technologies, now we're building up a technology for the assignation of the therapeutical value. And we're allowed to have price at the point of entry for the country. The pharmaceutical industry tries to, of course, fix the highest price possible. But if they determine those requirements, we will consider it. This will go to the pricing commission, and they will assign the value. In this way, we'll have a better protection. And this is a kind of development that we think will be going on from here till November. We're building these documents, conducting several searches, but also there remains to have a discussion of the technical administrative aspects and also how these documents will be published. Very short time with a tremendous amount of work.
Costos crecientes de la atención de salud en Colombia.
With cost of healthcare in Colombia, this is a true demand that is made by the administration and society in general. Thank you so much. Do you want to delve further on the experience you've had in this regarding in Brazil?
In Brazil, the prices of drugs, of medications, they are regulated. And medications that are registered in Brazil, there is a national agency of surveillance that registers the price of medications. There's also CEMED, a commission, and the prices are registered, recorded. There's a top price, but to incorporate them in these health systems, the price of incorporation is demanded. They can use the maximum price, and they ask that they be incorporated in the health system. Those are assessed, and the commission decides if they're cost effective or not. So there's a price for the market, and the also there's a requester that proposes a price to incorporate in the national health system.
Thank you, Ricardo. Alicia Ferreira from Uruguay, and she sends her greetings. And whether the economic analysis, when the cost effectiveness ratio goes above the threshold, does this have an importance when this concession is not made? I know how familiar you are with the specificities in our country. Ever since 2015, a piece of legislation was published which considers health as a constitutional right. From that moment on, it was said that all technologies and everything that has to do with the health of this national or foreign citizens in the Colombian territory would be covered. Then we come to the topic of the so-called exclusions. When something is not covered because there's no evidence, if this doesn't happen in the actual country, or if there is no clear impact on the safety of the patient. So theoretically, everything is being covered on the one hand, and on the other hand, there is sort of a mechanism for collective security and a small amount which is covered for new aspects. So everything is covered by in one way or the other. Of course, one thing is to say that, and the different thing is that real access to technologies is variable according to the region of the country, the regimes of allocation, and many other circumstances. Theoretically, however, everything is covered. Difficult to deal with that duality. Sometimes you say, I'm going to use this, but if everything's covered, why should I use it? This deals with being exposed to therapeutical habits and how much this is going to be recognized on a value-based price. The economists have to make a tremendous effort in order to have an overall picture, a general solution to these issues, which are not very simple. Everything is covered, but then we have a threshold. With regard to the coverage, we have several questions. One has to do with the determination of the cost-effectiveness threshold in rage and orphan diseases. Karina, too, has told us, what consideration have you given in the estimation of these thresholds and the economic evaluations for oncology? And basically, those are the two questions that we have before us. This is addressed to you, doctor. Very well, then, to say that what is believed that for orphan diseases, serious diseases, there's also liberation that has to be given by society. On the other hand, we have the care given to a group of interest group which wants to have a multi-criterion analysis, different group that would just like to have this cost-effectiveness threshold, such as the Ministry of Finance. So we're trying to look at what should be contained in this threshold, which is a very important indicator. And we do think that much weight has to be given to it in the final result, but it is not always the same criteria. There are ethical criteria, other aspects that have to do with the preferences expressed by society. So although it is a very good element for comparing, it is not the only thing that has to be borne in mind. We do not consider that cost effectiveness has the same weight as other factors. These are preliminary discussions, but these discussions are taking place nowadays. And maybe soon we will come to some sort of overall solution to this problem. Now there's a question for Ricardo next. You wanted to say something?
In Brazil, we have a higher threshold for rare diseases, 7,000 reais. For oncology, we did not create any specific case. Cancer varies a lot in terms of aggressiveness. Some cancers threaten lives, others don't. So the more serious would be included in serious diseases, and the threshold will be 3 times the reference value. That's how we deal with that. Technologies that have really a higher price.
También para Ricardo, Alicia Ferreira pregunta desde Uruguay, ¿cuánto es el
for Ricardo, Alicia Ferreira from Uruguay is asking how much would be the thresholds in US dollars.
Ricardo, ¿estás en mute?
Ricardo?
We have to see the price of dollars today, 46. So that's the value divided by 46. The GDP has fallen since the study was conducted. It's $8,000 today. Our GDP is near $8,000. So 8,000 reais for quality.
Y en relación a esta misma pregunta, Carmen Romero.
And related to this same question, Carmen Romero is asking if, based on the different studies analyzed by the different methodologies, the cost effectiveness thresholds is approximate to the proposed by WHO?
Não tem nada a ver com a afirmação
The use of the GDP per capita is not related to what the WHO said. It's just that the values are similar. We worked with Argentina and also with the UK. The value is the same value used by WHO some time ago, but we did not make our calculation based on that. But it's around 1 GDP point per capita.
Gracias. Doctora, no sé si quiera agregar algo.
Sí, nosotros 86%.
Yes, would you like to ask something? Yes. Our per capita GDP doesn't have anything to do with the WHO value, but we just consider the lower value as opposed to the upper value. Thank you.
Tengo aquí otra pregunta
I have another question
a la presentación de la doctora Robayo.
Regarding Dr. Robayo's presentation. If the cost threshold will be included in the manual update. And then finally, which is the threshold value in Colombia? We hope that everything will be published in the new manuals. We have been holding discussions with the health authorities. It all depends on what the disease is. For some diseases, it will be higher than for others. And the other thing that, no, that's it that I have to say. We will be able to just have a referral point for this later on. But we hope to set up a value that allows us to compare things so that we can establish priorities. I think this question is important. If the data of the cost effectiveness thresholds can be extrapolated from one country to another, that's the question. No, definitely no. You can have econometric and statistic estimations, but it all depends on the characteristics of the population, because the characteristics of this population are very different from one country to another, mortality, health data. So we have to determine what is included, what is not included in each country. So we believe that they cannot be extrapolated. I also forgot to say that the quality or the quality would be about $5,000, over $5,000, but we have to adjust this for inflation in other years. Maybe once we conduct this exercise again, we will be able to see what we do. We cannot do this calculation or perform this calculation every year. Ricardo.
I agree. And to add to what Adriana said, apart from characteristics that are socioeconomic and health, countries have different health systems. The way in which each country organizes its health system, the financing, all that will have an impact in the construction of these cost effectiveness thresholds. So the countries have to do their own calculations, and they have to be based on the data of those countries. Data should be specific to each country. In the US, for example, they have more than 2,000 insurance companies with different prices. For the threshold in the US will be very different to other systems that are more centralized, more organized, systems with a single payer. So that has a great impact on the definition of the threshold of cost effectiveness.
Bueno, aquí hay una pregunta también para Ricardo.
Ricardo, another question for Ricardo. Can you explain the frontier of deficiency, and if this can be combined in an evaluation to determine cost effectiveness?
The efficiency frontier or border, as I said in my presentation, aims at discovering, based on past incorporations, what would be the ratio of incremental cost effectiveness that will bring the same efficiency that was used in past technologies. That efficiency in the graph I showed is the curve of that line. So the next technology to be incorporated should be incorporated in the place of the graph where you had the same inclination of the curve, because the efficiency of incorporation mathematically, he's frozen for me. I don't know if, oh, he's back. Okay, he's back. An example where it can be used. Technologies in health situations where you don't see increase in the number of years to be lived, but in quality of life. Psoriasis, you had a score of the disease, and you cannot compare it because there are different technologies, and we use the frontiers of efficiency to see what would be the necessary of efficiency of the new drugs compared to the psoriasis. So other health conditions for children is different, go to get quality data. So because of the questionnaires. So the frontier of efficiency can be applied when there are more than 2 technologies that have already been incorporated for that disease. If the technology you want to incorporate is the first, you will not be able to do this frontier of efficiency. So there are requirements. That one of them is that you need at least 2 technologies that already create this frontier, and then you would be adding a new one with the same inclination of the curve. Specific conditions, you can use them in any case, nor is it desirable to be used, because this method restricts comparison to a specific niche of drugs for a given disease. So you reduce the efficiency of the allocation. You don't compare it with all others. Or nor do you use cost of opportunity, the cost of opportunity, or the opportunity cost for that.
Carlos Villa says that economic evaluation as an innovative strategy is a mechanism to guarantee a quality service and ensure financial sustainability of the health system within a context where needs and demands in health are numerous or infinite, but resources are limited. And then, yes, we have a comment from Argentina, from Santiago, says, very good presentations. I wanted to ask you, how would the countries deal with the differences in financing mechanisms that with different capabilities of payment in the same country? Thank you so much for your comments. In Colombia, we have 3 methods. Some of them are subsidized for special payments for health. We have a contribution, it's about $1,000,000 pesos, is $250. Right now, the peso is valued, and then the difference with subsidized services is 50,000 pesos. So we have very similar payments. We hope at the present time, we're not going to calculate the subsidized payments. And then, of course, we have taken temporary, made the temporary decisions. So basically, I would
que
say
seriam
that
uma
all the
prestação
methods
similar
have similar benefits in
num financiamento
our
diferente
country because of the law.
para que
So this
possa fazer
we
mais
have
coisas aí
allows more flexibility
da
to do
mesma
more things.
maneira.
We are introducing some new measures,
Mas
but
também
we
estamos
have
passando por uma
changed
mudança de
governments recently.
governo,
I'm sure we will have some structural
estamos passando também
adjustments,
por alguns ajustes
not only in the law.
estruturais,
We are
que são
talking
parte da
about
reforma,
reforms for next year. So we have
e
to wait and
esperamos que
see
passe.
what's going on. We have an
Isso
entire
está
new
acontecendo na região, temos
current
algumas
of
mudanças
changes in the region.
para
So we got to
para
see how
estabelecer
things
como
could be done.
será
There would be
e
many
para
changes, but we have to
ver onde as
see
mudanças vão.
where are those changes headed for, and this is,
Teremos
has
possíveis
an
reformas
ideological
adiante.
component. Ricardo.
Eu não entendi muito a pergunta. Pode repetir, por favor?
I didn't understand the question. Could you repeat, please?
Perdón.
I apologize. How do you intend to tackle the difference between the financial mechanisms with different capabilities for payment within the same country? And if you have discussed the advantages and disadvantages of differential thresholds in this case?
For different payers, if a country has different payers, I believe that each payer should define their threshold, because it depends the organization structure of each payer. So the theory that propose this universal healthcare is heavily based with a single pay. Because it is, as it says, a disposition threshold, because it's a reference to each payer. So each payer has to pay because it has a different structure. The capability to pay is different. The scale of purchase is different. So everything needs to be taken into consideration when we work with the cost effectiveness threshold for different payers. I believe that's it.
Gracias, Ricardo. Tenemos dos manos levantadas de Edgar Domínguez.
Thank you, Ricardo. Edgar Dominguez and Daniela Vera. I don't know if you want to intervene at this point. No, okay. So we don't have them, no. I think all of the questions have been answered. Marcia is asking Ricardo if you consider I don't know if you can help me with this. Yes, go ahead.
So my question is about the threshold for cost effectiveness for the single-use healthcare in Brazil versus the supplemented healthcare. If it would make sense to have the same threshold for both systems. And I believe it's very similar to the payers question. As I mentioned, once you establish a threshold for the SUS, the Brazilian healthcare system, is a single payer for the system as a whole thing, but is also sponsored by taxes. So you take a supplemental healthcare that has multiple health insurance companies and different prices, different market segments. Some will be focused on lower income, others luxury market. So the procedure for the NS has no exemplified system, the way you don't explain exactly what are the procedures that will be included or not. It doesn't have disclosure everything. So you use the public fundings that was sponsored by taxes, and it goes to the private sector. So when you buy a healthcare, you're talking about a product, and we talk about different values. And people that actually pay, they have different products. So that's why you cannot move a threshold for the single healthcare, public health, to a segment that's completely fragmented, and it also has socioeconomic differences. So it's impossible to do this comparison. I would like also to have a provocation. We have an automatic incorporation for the procedure. The interpreter apologized, but there's a background noise and I cannot hear the question. It could be difficult to do this comparison, but in summer it's done once we do it on automatic. The interpreter again apologized for the questions background noise. So the threshold for the SUS, the SUS, the Brazilian United Healthcare, it's kind of different because once you buy a service for the universal healthcare, you could be interested in services that the SUS does not offer, because what you're buying is plus, is an extra, something that goes beyond if you have access to the SUS. So I believe that makes sense that the SUS threshold is the baseline. So everything started with that from that point on, because you're buying a product that will give you something extra, something more than the SUS offer.
Thank you, so much, Ricardo. I think we are coming close to closing the discussion. This has been very enriching. I think I have a comment from Aurelio Melo. He gives complementary information to what Ricardo has said. And he said that this is complementary to what Ricardo has said. There are some average threshold systems that are not public systems. There are many systems. And sometimes we have to consider this within social justice. And many times people have to go and get actually the thresholds that are not available in the public system. And so we going towards closing. I don't know whether you want to have some final words. Thank you so much, Adriana. No, thank you very much to Pajo, Verónica, Ricardo, Francisco, and members of the group. These are just tools for discussions. These are technical tools, but we have to remember that there are always some different processes coming from different areas of society, and we have to compare this, and this help us to concentrate on topics, but this is part of what happens every day. So there are challenges, technologies, more expensive technologies, but we have to compare them because, as we always say, we have an infinite number of demands and we have limited resources in some cases, but this is useful so that people can start discussion points.
Issues of equity, inequality, much can be said in that regard. You may have a positive attitude or Western type, but to have a true element that might be a good element of exchange for everyone is something difficult to attain, something where we can all collaborate. We will do so with much pleasure. We have our address and that you can find on our pages, and we reiterate our invitation for those who will be coming over in October. It will be a great pleasure to see you. We are going to tell you about everything we've done in the last 10 years, all the assessments and all the efforts, and we'll have a very close discussion, we hope, with people both in our country and in the region, in a beautiful city town. So I extend to you this invitation, but I must take advantage of this opportunity to give you this ad. Thank you very much, Adriana. Ricardo.
I would like to ask, thank you for all the questions. Verónica, Alexandre, Barbara, Luciani. I would like to also to thank you for the invitation from the PAHO and also the Ministry of Health. I'd like to say that I've been satisfied with the threshold and also understand that the partners such as Colombia that has been making progress with the healthcare. And I believe it's fundamental for us to assure efficiency in technology incorporation. And particularly with SUS, there is a universal healthcare in Brazil that we can assure fundamental principles that are based of a system, and we can assure sustainability of the system with efficiency. And from this point on, we can assure integrity, universality, access to different technology, and the use of cost-effectiveness threshold brings a proper healthcare system where resources can be used in an effective way and to assure the main goal, more lives and with quality for the users. And I believe that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much to both of you. Thank you to PAHO. We would like to express our gratitude for consideration and giving me the possibility of being the moderator of the panel. Thank you. Goodbye. Thank you very much, Verónica. Just taking the floor to wrap up and to say hello. My name is Francisco Vergao. I think you know me. I'm an official of PAHO in the unit of medications and technologies. We've had a problem with the audio. Maybe you can hear me better now. I wish to thank you all. Thank you, Ricardo. Thank you, Adriana. Thank you, Veronica, for your wonderful presentations, the wonderful moderation and chairmanship. A very important topic, both by we see by the number of participants and the very wealthy discussion that we had afterwards. It is an issue which is indeed very important today. So I will not like to repeat what you have already said, but I thank all the participants and remind you that this webinar, such as the future ones, will appear at the RedETSA page, RedETSA page. I thank the Ministry of Health of Brazil also, which is the other partner as part of this series of webinars. Without further ado, I would like to say that we officially close. We come to the end of this seminar. Thank you very much. Have a very good afternoon. Goodbye. Thank you. Goodbye. Thank you.
Tchau, tchau. Até logo.